My name is Helena Reckitt. I am one of the people involved in putting together the Now You Can Go programme, which has been taking place across the ICA, Raven Row, Space Studios, as well as here at the Showroom for the past 10 days. And other members of the group that's put this programme together are Angelica Wolatinari, Giulia Casalini, Diana Giorgio, Laura Guy, Irene Ravel and Amy Tobin, and Dimitra Kikitsa has been working with us as our coordinator. Here at the Showroom, Louise Shelley has been a very key contributor and collaborator, and we're also very grateful to Emily Pethick, director of the Showroom. And one of the reasons we wanted to work with the Showroom is because it has a sort of long-standing commitment to feminist politics and projects, including being the home of the Cinenova feminist video film distributor. You can make an appointment to view works from the Cinenova archive here. And they also have a number of long-standing collaborations with feminist and women's groups and communities, including Justice for Domestic Workers, which is a group that has been central to this programme. Marissa Begonia from Justice for Domestic Workers spoke at a panel last Saturday on social reproduction, and tomorrow, as part of the programme, Justice for Domestic Workers have their annual meeting, which everyone is welcome to attend. Apparently there'll be some very good food. Some of the groups that the Showroom has a long-standing relationship with will also be taking part in workshops as part of the Communal Knowledge programme, which will be led by some artists who have been part of this programme. So Now You Can Go is supported by the Arts Council of England Grants for the Arts, and we have additional support from the European Women's Video Art in the 70s and 80s project at the University of Dundee, the Canada Council for the Arts, the Swedish Arts Grants Committee of IASPIS, and from several different funds at Goldsmiths, University of London, the Annual Fund, the Art Department and the Women's Art Library. And we've also had a lot of sort of in-kind help from the venues that we're working with. We've also had volunteers help us from the Feminist Duration reading group, and some master's students from Goldsmiths from the Curating and Visual Cultures programs have also provided invaluable support. And you can just imagine the kind of behind-the-scenes labour that has been going on. And the sort of list of funds we've managed to get little bits of money from, I think, reflects the sort of energy of the group. Everybody looked to the sort of institutions that they might be working at, or a student at, or familiar with, and kind of got what they could. People offered to put up international guests in their homes. So in many ways, we can say this project has been a labour of love, with all the potential for self-exploitation that is entailed in that phrase, which is something that will probably come up in our discussions as Carla Lonzi, Revolta Femminile, and other feminists that we will be thinking through were very concerned with some of these dangers. So Now You Can Go comes out of a small reading group that I set up in February at Goldsmiths, looking at Italian feminisms. The texts that we read were not new. In fact, most of them had been written in the 70s and 80s, but they were largely new to me. I knew a bit about Silvia Federici, Wages for Housework campaign, and so on. But as someone who's been very interested in feminist art and theory for quite a long time, I was surprised by how unfamiliar many of these positions were that we explored. And I found them so powerful and resonant that I really wanted to discuss them with other people and see how we might relate them to our current lives, practices and struggles. And out of the readings came a 2-day symposium at Goldsmiths called Feminist Duration in Art and Curating. And the concept of duration, which we borrowed from the art historian Amelia Jones, was key as we were concerned with how feminist ideas, struggles and passions are transmitted and endured across time and place, language and culture. And the two-day symposium really got us going, and afterwards a number of us got together and decided to work on something which would be more public, which would take the ideas that we'd explored in the university context and connect them to wider publics, which is what we're doing here. And out of this sort of quite focused academic context, the Now You Can Go programme emerged. I don't think we intended to set up such an intense programme of activities, and it's perhaps a little ironic given that one of the questions we're asking is the danger of exhaustion and burnout exacerbated by networked capitalism and the sort of self-exploiting labour I mentioned earlier, that we are perhaps in danger of burning ourselves out, and perhaps some of you who've been coming to our events. But the programme had a sort of self-generating quality. As we learned about new critical and cultural positions, we also encountered the works of artists that were unfamiliar to us. So, for example, last weekend, the work of Marinella Pirelli, the Italian artist and experimental filmmaker, debuted for the first time in the UK. So works that were made in the 60s and 70s found a sort of belated public in a programme at the ICA curated by Lucia Aspesi with Irene Ravel. And last night, Laura Luzzi and Giulia Casalini also introduced a number of works into this sort of London, UK experimental art and film context by Italian artists, which again were unfamiliar to, I think, a lot of people in the audience. And this was through a project at Dundee University, which is dedicated to archiving and restoring sort of video works which are quite fragile. And one of the people who presented her work last night, Elaine Schmilt, in her introduction said, when I was making my works in the 70s, I didn't think about self-archiving. This was, not a concern. So we've been thinking about the responsibility and care required that demanded when we translate, curate, recontextualize works from different eras and different cultures. We've been very aware of the politics of translation, to borrow the phrase of Gayatri Spivak, which was a text we looked at in the reading group last week. We've been conscious of some of the possible violence entailed in taking something from one context to another, especially in the case of artists like Marinella Pirelli, who chose to withdraw her films from public circulation. And Lucia, the curator with Irene, has been very careful about finding appropriate contexts for Pirelli's belated entry into the sort of Anglo-American film and art scene. So Gayatri Spivak, in the text that we looked at, talks about the importance for the translator of immersing herself in the specific vernacular of the language that she's translating, in what she calls its rhetoricity. And there's a great point in her essay where she berates Western feminists for their impatience to get their hands on new texts from outside the Western tradition. And it's a demand that Spivak resists, insisting on the importance of the translator taking time with her work. So she's really paying attention to the specific context of the original language. So we've also been thinking in this whole question about translation, transmission, generation generation in different ways. We've also been looking at techniques of oral history. Nina Wakeford presented a two-part workshop called Feeling Backwards, where we looked at strategies of oral history recording and thinking about how the way in which a question is posed, by whom and from where, is as influential in inciting answers as the question is itself. And in the panel discussion Rescue Missions earlier this week at the ICA, we juxtaposed the now quite familiar debate about the historical erasure of women's and feminist artistic contributions with more recent concerns about the way in which women's art is belatedly discovered. And we raised questions about who benefits from these rescue missions. So our concern overall has been with the generative impact of earlier feminisms on us today. We've just come out of a 2-day workshop, which some of the people in this room took part in, called Our Future Network, led by Alex Martinez-Rowe, whose short film we will see after the lunch break. And this was an exploration of the Milan Women's Bookstore, in which we explored the collective's lived practices of entrustment, consciousness raising, and the construction of symbolic motherhood as a sort of challenge to patriarchy, to think how those tactics might engender our own practices of sexual differing. In returning to earlier feminisms, we are inspired to create new ones. So I'll finally hand over to our panel chair, the art historian Francesca Ventrella. And Francesca's deep commitment to and engagement with feminist practices has actually been very beneficial to my knowledge of the field, and I'm grateful to him for his support in developing this programme. Francesca was also involved in the visit of Suzanne Santoro, a key artist associated with Italian Feminisms, to the Women's Art Library, which happened a couple of months ago. And he's working with Giovanna Zapperi, who's also on the panel, to edit the volume Feminism and Art in Post-War Italy, The Legacy of Carla Lonzi, which will be published next year. And he's completing his own book, Connoisseurial Intimacies, Sexuality, Physiological Aesthetics, and the Making of Modern Art Writing. And just finally would like to say that I'm particularly delighted to welcome Fulvia Cannavale, because Fulvia gave a talk about 18 months ago in Toronto, a very brilliant talk about Italian feminisms, which for me sort of opened a door. So, thank you.